towards the question, right? And I
Yeah, that's
asked
not what
you
I'm
a question.
So
Presumably, I asked you some words, and
sorry,
those words are going to be
sorry.
opposite.
Daddy's talking.
We got an
Daddy,
actual theist on the thing now.
I'll bet.
Yeah, it's just Ernesto, dude.
Oh yeah, you invite him up or something.
Yeah. Wait, is he not on?
He is.
Oh,
he
yes,
just hasn't said nothing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ernesto.
Hey guys, how are you?
What's up?
So is the position of those in the room that theism is not rational?
Depending on the model, yeah. I'm not convinced that it is rational to hold to theism. In some senses, yeah.
Is that because you don't find?
It's more of an inquiry, so it's going to be the case that one would have to give an answer to yes or no that it's the case theism is rational, and then give like an argument. But I mean, we can move from that if you want. We could just talk about whether or not why I'm unconvinced of certain models, if that's what you want to do.
Sure, I'll give it a shot. So I think it's rational to hold positions that are more likely true than not, and I think that theism is more likely true than not. So therefore, I think theism is rational.
Sure. What's your sense of theism, and what's the inference that draws that it is the case it's more likely?
Theism, I would subscribe to like a classical theistic model, and what is more likely is that the probability is greater than 50%.
Okay. Well, what's the inference that actually demonstrates that God is to be more likely? What's the argument for that? Can you somehow make an argument for God's ontology?
I would make various arguments for his existence.
Sure, start with one.
And I would say, start with any of them?
Yeah, that's fine.
I would say the argument from change is a decent one.
Yeah, what is the argument?
Sure. The argument is that we see that change occurs in the world. Change is the result of a potential being actualized. That potential being actualized could only occur by something that is previously actualized. You can't have it.
You're talking about Aristotelian potentiality, right? I can just reject on the basis that I don't believe in normative virtues.
Yes, exactly right. I'm talking about Aristotelian potentialities. Why do you reject it? Could you be a little bit more specific on why you reject it?
Yeah, I'm not persuaded of the idea of normative virtues.
What word are you using? I'm not familiar with it. Normative?
Yeah, dormative virtues can be that there's some virtuous capacity to actuate some state of affairs in which it's going to be or reside dormant within some entity or status of something.
Gotcha. So what is your account of change then?
I just change to be when one is to move, or I mean, without invoking the term of change, it's going to be difficult. I'll just take it to mean the movement from different or discrete state of affairs.
I'm not sure that would capture any sort of change that we on like a regular base understanding we would be able to subscribe to things like changes something that exists out of something that seemingly previously did not exist. That's what one of the things that the argument tries to capture. So how would you do that without invoking some sort of potential embedded within the thing that has been changed?
Yeah, I'm not clear on what you mean by potential.
Sure, it's a characteristic of a thing that has the capacity to be reflected into reality. So just to give you like a couple examples.
So you're a realist?
Yep, but I'm not sure that really affects the argument. I would say
and you're also a correspondent, right? A correspondent. Well, whatever. You believe in the correspondent theory of truth, correct?
Not too sure what that is.
Okay, well, there's going to be different frameworks or theories of truth in which one would define to be truth. Under the correspondent theory of truth, it's going to say truth is that which, whatever is to be uttered, accurately corresponds with the nature of reality. When you say that, you believe that potentiality or this characteristic of feasibility to reflect reality, that's going to be that there's going to be a correspondence or constitutive mechanism in which we can reach this whatever characteristic and how it is of the nature of reality.
Apologies for maybe not being as caught up on philosophy as you are, but I'm not really sure what that has to do with the argument that I'm presenting.
Well, the idea is that I don't believe we have epistemic access to the nature of reality for which one can say that this characteristic is to conform to the nature of it. There's going to be some epistemic instrument in which one can confer that this is actually to be the nature of reality, and not just some distinction between what is intuited and what is actually noumenal.
So without you having epistemic certainty of what is actually occurring in change, you can't label it or you can't talk about it otherwise?
Well, the idea is that to say something is real is to say that it is a part of reality, right? It's going to be an element that which is constitutive of that which is fundamentally real within a system, but the only way one can make that utterance is if there is any form of epistemic access in which we can actually endeavor into that system of reality or reality, right? So unless you have some access to reality, you can never infer that something is to be real or correspond with the nature of reality.
I guess maybe the question then becomes a little bit more simple. Do you have a separate theory that accounts for the change that you see without having to invoke ignorance? I mean, although you could fall back into ignorance, in which case maybe your better position wouldn't be atheism, it would be agnosticism. But do you have a better account for change that occurs in the in the world. I know you tried to lay it forward, but I just don't see how that's a better account than the one that Aristotelians would put forth.
Well, the idea is that I'm just conveying a criticism, and I'm not like representing that I have a better hypothesis that's in competition juxtaposed to yours. The idea is that I'm unpersuaded of the proposition that what you laid out to be causality is an accurate representation of some observable state of conceptual scheme. So I don't think I should commit to an argument that is parasitic upon a causal interpretation, that which I'm not convinced of.
Gotcha. So you're just going to claim, although you're unconvinced by an Aristotelian framework of cause and potential act and how that influences change, well, you're not going to commit to that. You don't know what a better alternative is.
I mean, I can lay out like hundreds of like different models if I really wanted to in this instance, and then we can go down like exhaustively which one is actually like flourished like in comparison to all. But obviously I'd rather not do that. The idea is that I'm not really certain on which one is to be even laid out, or what's the criterion in which we can evaluate which system of causality is a better representation. So I just don't see reason as to why I should like give assentment to your model, unless you have like some specific or specified reasoning that allows you to induce this as being like a more adequate model of causality compared to like all the like alternative possibilities.
Definitely not brushed up on all the alternatives, but I just think that the Aristotelian framework is the one that makes most intuitive sense. It's the one that makes sense of the sensory data that we're presented with, and it tightly fits into a world framework that is readily accessible to those who just choose to look at it from that framework.
I didn't exactly capture what you're trying to like mean by that, but the idea still stands that you're saying that in order for there to be this model of causality, that or like in the sense of potentiality, that there's going to be a normative potential for conferring a virtuous state of affairs, but that's going to depend on a corresponding nature to that potential state, to the nature of reality, which I'm still not understanding how you reach the state of reality. Like, what's the epistemic instrument you use in which you can say what is real and what's not?
Again, within an Aristotelian framework would be our senses.
So what are you, an empiricist or like logical positivist?
Again, don't know what those labels do. I'm just trying to present an argument for the labels.
Okay. Well, you said that the senses are going to be that which is like that the world that we intuit under the senses is going to be that which you consider to be reality. But in my understanding, I take reality to be a system of entities or elements that are real to the nature of that system, and not going to be like imaginary, or somehow we're going to be like deceived systematically or anything like that. Because like I'm not understanding how you account for skeptical scenarios. It could be the case that if it's the senses that you rely on for like furnishing that which is reality, if one senses is unreliable, like how do you account for someone who experiences like a hallucination? Is their experience or account for reality still going to be like equally competing as yours, their senses of reality?
Nope.
Okay, and why is that? What's the discrepancy?
They have something that malfunctions in their nature, and so therefore their nature is not corresponding with reality in an accurate way.
Okay, well, I'm not understanding then what's the criterion in which you can reach that. It's the case that it's not the majority that's actually experiencing this malfunction in the cognitive faculties, as opposed to the minority, which is actually having epistemic access to reality. How do you distinguish that? Or are you just making a frequentist account in which like the majority wouldn't necessarily just entail that they're experiencing reality? Because then that's going to lead to like issues with well, we can get into that later. But are you taking a frequentist apparatus, or like how do you distinguish between experiencing reality under some sense of scope of senses compared to like some other individual who experiences different things with the same senses?
I think experiences could be tested, and to the extent that the test can conform readily across those various experiences, then you could somewhat reasonably rely on that.
Well, the idea psychologically is going to like appeal to like a frequentist apparatus for that which is a hallucination, and it's going to be the case that given some state of affairs which an individual who had not undergone that experience observed that state of affairs, it doesn't somehow reflect what they perceive to be reality. But I'm not understanding how it's not the case the minority, the one who is designated this evaluative state of hallucinations, to not be the ones who are actually experiencing the reality. So you're saying that it's the case hallucinations are going to be like some malformed interpretation of the real, given consideration of the senses. But how do you distinguish that it's not the case that the majority who experience under the senses, who are not evaluated to be a hallucination, are actually having the misexperience of reality?
Again, I think you could just test it. I think you could just test the hallucination versus somebody who is not hallucinating.
Yeah, but the test would only designate the idea that there's going to be a discrepancy in what is interpreted through the senses. I'm not understanding how you reach that one is hallucinating from one who's not.
Not necessarily. I think there's various tests that you could run. I mean, I guess maybe even you would say that the test would have to then be tested, which then have to be tested, and all that thing is going to show is one state of affairs versus the other. Yet that test itself could not capture the reality. But I think at a certain point you kind of have to stop the logical train and kind of hinge your theories on something, and not hinge the theory on normal apparatus of faculties, so that the argument of somebody hallucinating really, it could be the case that they're the number one, but like,
okay, well, wait, I mean, what you just like responded with wasn't exactly like, I wouldn't say that was really an adequate response to what I was saying, but I can better represent this like as an analog or analogy. So let's say that there's one person who experiences something, and their experience is described as X, and then some discrete entity also experiences the same or is in the same locality in which they observe the same environmental state of affairs that that other individual undergoed. But he said his interpretation of the experience is going to be Y as opposed to X. Let's say X, there's 100 people who observed X, and the other person, there's only going to be a single entity who perceived Y. Which one would you say is a hallucination in that scenario and why, right? Because all hallucination would say is that we can evaluate a discrepancy between interpretive experiences of states of affairs, and then we're just going to designate the minority to being the one that is the or like just not adequate representation. And I'm wondering if you're going to posit that same thing. Like, are you saying that whatever is the larger group would be considered the misexperience, or what?
I think I would just posit that whoever, whether it's the larger group or the smaller group, whoever, maybe this falls into a circular argument. I'm going to try to avoid that, but whoever's experience can be independently verified, not by other people, but by instruments that are capable of making the determination of what those things are, those could be verified, and that would be the trustworthy experience.
The idea is that, ironically enough, that we're talking about normative virtues, that's in itself going to be a normative virtue, because it's going to, the only way one can lend credence to the idea that one is to have a maladaptive experience or interpretation of some experience is going to be the case of using some instrument we can evaluate someone. One can use that same instrument and using, like, say that they have misrepresentation under the senses. Their evaluative condition with that instrument would be, like, incapable of actually, like, denoting whether or not something is actually accurately being described as a hallucination or not.
I apologize, I lost you there a bit.
Well, the idea is that the instrument in itself in which we can designate hallucination or non-hallucination is going to be that we still have to experience an instrument which gives the evaluative measure, which one can still undergo misinterpretation of the state of affairs.
Yeah, okay, exactly. That's what I meant when I tried to do the infinite regress of tests having to test tests. That's exactly what I meant. That I think your argument would fall into the fact that, like, even if there was going to be an independent, like, verifying thing. So just to take for an example, if the hallucination is a visual hallucination, you could have an independent instrument that captures reality accurately from a visual perspective, namely a video camera or a photography machine, a video camera, or just a regular old camera. But you would posit that the video camera or the camera itself would suffer from whatever defect is lending to one side or the other. But I think at a certain point, the argument starts to just lose its touch with reality, in the sense that you could always question anything, but at a certain point you have to hinge your theories on something, like you're grounding first principles. And obviously you could argue that senses are unreliable and stuff, and I understand that that's what you're doing, but I would say as a first principle, senses are that with which we come to learn of the world, and under normal understandings they could be trusted, and based on that then we could go into the arguments of causality. So I mean, attacking first principles, I understand why you do it, because that's how you attack argumentation, but I just think we would have different worldviews if you think that senses are unreliable, and I think senses are reliable.
But it's going to be the case that okay, well, first of all, I mean, evidently there are going to be instances, and there are, at least under scientific scope, for which one can say that senses in some state of affairs are actually not reliable. But it seems that this discussion has, like, kind of been watered down in interpretation or, like, understanding from, like, because it's kind of getting very obscure. So from my understanding, we were talking about causality, and then we were bringing up potentiality, and then you said potentiality is going to be a characteristic of that which is correspondent to reality, and then I asked you what do you assert to be reality, and you said that which is interpreted under the senses, and then that's when I gave the the counterfactual in which one is to actually undergo misinterpretation under the senses. And then we got to hallucinations, in which we're talking about instruments and verifying, and then the instruments in themselves can't be properly verified, because the instruments is like evaluative measure are also going to undergo a sense state in which one can even declare that evaluation. And then that's where I'm not following what your response was to that.
Dude, props on following that argument all the way to its end. That was pretty impressive. My response to that is first principles. Like, at a point, you have to hinge your theories of life on something, and I could understand why, from a first principles perspective, you might want to say that your senses are unreliable, because in many cases that could very well be the case, that your senses could be unreliable. But I mean, and I take that, I understand that, but I would appeal to individuals that operate under normal circumstances, which would probably be most people in this room, to evaluate the argument of causality based on their sensory experiences and see whether or not it comports to reality.
The idea is that I kind of pinned you to where either you have to bite the bullet that it's going to be the case that all senses or senses are not going to be reliable interpreting reality, or it's going to be the case that there are going to be reliable senses in which others are not going to be reliable. But then from there, we're going to lead to some form of almost like rabbit trail where there's not going to be any ability in which one can actually properly diagnose the hallucination, as opposed to it being the accurate interpretation, which I'm still failing to see how you're accounting for the actual hallucination from the non-hallucination.
I don't know, in terms of an argument, how I would properly make that distinction, to be honest with you. But I would maybe try to reel in the argument and say that from a regular perspective, and I know philosophy hates this term, but at a certain point, you kind of just have to appeal to people's basic understanding and try to understand arguments on their merits. I would kind of shuffle away from all the argument that we went into the senses and understanding, and I would posit for people whether or not the Aristotelian understanding of potentiality, change, and actuality, whether or not that comports to their daily understanding, and if so, to evaluate the argument under those circumstances. And of course, you could be skeptical about the distinctions that are made within the argument, and that's exactly how you attack the argument. But I think for people who are not skeptical about those things because they actually live their lives exactly as the argument proceeds, it would be a pretty convincing argument.
Wait, so for clarity, I don't know if I misrepresented or misheard. Not misrepresented, misheard, but you said that eventually we're going to need to reach a point in which we just appeal to people or something along those lines, or what was it exactly you said?
Not necessarily in terms of appealing to people to inform the argument. What I'm saying is, at a certain point, the people listening to the argument have to kind of evaluate the argument based on their understanding of the world. And like, of course, and that's where I went into what I said about, like, you could definitely be skeptical about the premises, which is exactly how you attack the argument. But for other people who are not skeptical about the premises, because the premises comport to the daily reality of what they see change, and it gives a good explanation of how change occurs in the world, in the absence of a better alternative and one that's that explains reality better, I would say that it's reasonable. It's reasonable to take the argument as a valid argument and as a good one.
Okay, so
I have a question, or is this just one-on-one?
I mean, sure, you can ask your question, unless you want to keep it a one-on-one.
I'm just curious if you hold to like classical logic, or if you're like classical Aristotelian logic, or if you reject classical Aristotelian logic.
Yeah, that's not going to make sense because like it doesn't hold to the idea of like principle of exclusion, other like inferential rules.
Well, I'm thinking because if he's going to hold to like the notion of like causality, and he holds to like there's a potentiality, right? So one of the main objections to Aristotle's system is just that there's a contention. There's a tension between there being something existing in potential. If something exists in potential, it either exists or doesn't exist, right? So things either exist or don't exist. This is classical logic. Something existing as a potential, is that a thing that exists or doesn't exist?
It's not a thing that exists in reality at that moment. But
So
could come in.
it just doesn't exist. So potentiality is not a thing. That's the entailment from that.
Interesting. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, that's literally the idea of like literally why dormative virtues are a thing, which is like I believe it was Descartes that they just made a joke about the virtues of potentiality, in which like I believe it was like some form of drug that can put someone to sleep with its dormative powers, but its dormative powers are not, since they're not actuated, that potentiality isn't something that actually like exists in reality, and that it lacks any form of ontology.
That's an interesting thing. I'll give that one some thought, must admit.
I mean, this is something I use a lot with like God even actuating a universe. It's going to be the case that, I mean, there's many people who argue teleology and like abiogenesis is like statistically improbable or something like that crap. The idea is like, well, God is only going to have a more probabilistic outcome given that he has this intentionality or disposition to actuate without conveying other states of affairs. But what actually accounts for this like intentionality for which he even actuates the universe? That's gonna be a dormative virtue because nothing accounts for why God even has this intention. So it's gonna fail to be the case that one can even use God as a hypothesis because it lacks like substance, and there's no like subsisting explanation for this intentionality. It's just gonna be stipulated, and that's gonna be like another ontological commitment, which is gonna fail in terms of ontological economy sense.
Again, an interesting contention. Cool stuff. Appreciate talking with you guys. Hopefully, I'll catch you guys around in another room. Hopefully, I'll come better prepared.
Sure, that was nice talking.
An honest answer. I was curious to get to how he makes the probabilistic case. Like, it seems like, as far as I can tell, when we're talking about like probabilities, we need some sort of like a sample set or something, right? We have a sample set of one. Right? We just have the universe that exists. We don't have something else to sort of compare it to. And so if we he went down the Aristotelian route. The Aristotelian route definitely does not match well our even our sensory experiences, which I was going to challenge on that as well. Like the existence of things and potentiality is just not a thing. It's going to lead to a contradiction. And then there was also the issue of like if he says that the way in which he experiences the world, the way in which he accesses the world in some sort of like a real way, he's going to be like committed to like some kind of direct realism, like Aristotle. And so he's going to have to say the way in which he would know that God exists, if God is real, is going to be exhaustively via his sensory perceptions. But the argument he's going to offer for God is going to be a rationalistic case, right? So it's going to be about like the first cause is what I think he's going to go with. He's going with Aristotle's arguments. But this is going to bring into another contradiction. So it's either he knows about the world via his senses, or he knows about the world via his rationality, right? So he's got this sort of he's taking this sort of strong empirical route, and then the argument has nothing to do with that. It's like that's just silly. But
yeah, I mean, you're definitely like obviously far better than me. I kind of took over too much for that one. If there's like the next person who is to come, argue for theism, you can more than gladly take over. Then like I could butt in once in a while, but I'd like to give you some time too to also argue.
Yeah, it's still fun listening. I don't get to listen very much anymore, so it was nice to just kind of listen in and see what somebody else thought.
Yeah.
I think, as far as I can tell, a lot of the classical theists, the ones who go down these sort of line of reasoning, they forget to read the rest of philosophy. Like we have a couple of thousand years on them. If you've read any new stuff, you've got a few thousand years on them. It's kind of like showing up to a battle with a knight's armor, and I've got armor-piercing rounds with a 50 caliber. You're screwed, dude. You got to keep up.
When people come with only continental philosophy and no like understanding of analytic, they fail to like actually be good at debating. Like you can have all the continental philosophy, but like without any even like rudimentary analytic sense of philosophical knowledge or like cognizance, one is like not going to do well in a dialect.
Yeah, I think I like continental philosophy in the sense of like it's pretty poetry, but that's about all I've got for it.
Yeah,
So
it's not really going
that's
to be
about.
very useful.
It's not going to be useful in a debate. It's not going to be persuasive. They're more so saying they're saying deep things and they're poetic and they can have multiple interpretations. Like, but in actually using their systems, I think that they're very counterintuitive systems, and they have it's more continental is more of a style of writing than it is really like a way of reasoning or thinking about like clearly. Like if I were to define philosophy as something like the art of clear thinking, part of the problem with continental philosophy is that it fails to be philosophy. So because it's not very clear. Like
Yeah.
I've read I remember reading Hegel in university, and I read it again for one of my friends was doing a master's degree. He was in South Africa, and he calls me and he's like, he was like, I have no idea what I'm reading. I was like, what are you reading? He's like, Hegel, and we're supposed to be reading about the master slave dialectic. And I was like, I literally like went to pull my hair out, and I was like, okay, let me sit down with you. Let's go through it.
Yeah,
And
I
I started
remember
reading.
one of the people I asked, not sorry to interrupt, but I
You're
went
good.
around because I was reading Hegel and Aristotle because I was trying to get more into continental philosophy because all I read is analytical, contemporary work because it's only like really good digestible and like things that I can, like actually remember very well and utilize. But people kept saying like, even though it's more like a cringy insult to actually fail to like do anything because I would always destroy them. But many theists would say like read Aristotle. Even though I owned works of Aristotle, I never bothered reading them because like the 2 days I had them, I would try reading them. I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna read this shit. But no, yeah, I was asking like, how do I read this? Like it doesn't. It's like so archaic. The parlance is so sophisticated. Like they take like 200 more words than they need to like express a concept that analytics can just like convey and give like ground for justifying, defending, refuting, and all that. While it just like makes poetry, and it's not clear on what the concept actually is. And like even like till this day, I know people like Aristotle and Kant's works are like still like not even intersubjectively agreed upon on like or like a consensus on what they actually meant on some of the stuff they said.
Yeah,
Because of that.
I think there's an ambiguity that's actually, from their view, is beneficial. So they wanted to be ambiguous. They wanted to be saying deep things in a poetic way that could be taken from more than one perspective. That's like intrinsic to the style that is continental philosophy. Whereas if you take like analytic, they give like strict definitions for the terms, or at least they attempt to when it makes sense to do so, unless they think it's like some sort of like semantic primitive or something like that. In which case, they'll give a reason why they think they can't give a strict definition for the concept or something. But continental, I've never really enjoyed it, and I found Hegel to be particularly verbose for no apparent reason. He said a lot of stuff, and he never managed to get to the point. And by the time you make it to the point that you think he's trying to make, you've forgotten what the beginning was of the line of reasoning. So
I literally bought The Science of Logic by Hegel, and it was just like a translation that a friend of mine suggested. Or actually, who was it? I think it's that the dude in our server, the one with Marco. That he has like what is it? I think it's like a Thomas Jefferson PFP with sunglasses or something like that.
Oh, Maximo.
Yeah. I was like, I wanted more books because like I was trying to like read more, and then like he suggested like all continental to me, so I just chose one of them, and it was like Hegel because I know Hegel's like big. I didn't know how bad he was, but yeah, reading his stuff is like not good at all. Like literally, it's like a waste of money. I might as well either got like a survey or introduction into like Hegelian logic rather than actually picking up his own work and reading the translation.
I think so. I think dealing with certain philosophers, it makes sense to handle first like their actual works. Like particularly modern philosophers, they usually write papers rather than books, and it makes a lot of sense to deal with their works firsthand. A lot of older writers, they wrote these very long books. Sometimes they just didn't make any points in significant portions of the book, and so it's just like it's easier to just deal with someone else's interpretation of their work. Hegel's one that I always suggest. It's just easier to get an idea of what Hegel's trying to say by reading something else. It's not reading his books is exhausting, and it doesn't really, the amount of effort you put in to gain the information out of it is disproportionate to the amount of information you actually are going to get out of it. Right. So like if you're dealing with a work, you got to think about how much of my effort am I have to put in, and then what am I going to get out of that effort. And that's how I sort of I guess calibrate my whether or not I'm going to actually deal with first the actual writing of the individual, or if I'm going to deal with some sort of like a summary of the individual's works. And by and large, Hegel is one that I would just don't deal with his writings firsthand. It's just not worth it. It's exhausting. There's enough authors out there who have done enough works on his works, explaining his works, in order for you to get a decent idea and understand his position from them. I don't like Hegel. It's not where I put my my stock in. It's not really. If I was going to debate a Hegelian, I might have to go back and brush up on some stuff. But I don't have any interest in Hegel. Aristotle's interesting. I think it's he's got some views that are really interesting, particularly around his objections to like Plato. I found his like he sort of stole the third man argument from Plato and talks quite a bit about that. That's an interesting portion. He also has an idea that solves a lot of issues that come from nominalism. For like instead of going with like Platonic objects or nominalism, he takes this sort of third path that the objects are like tableness is real. It's just that two tables don't share this independent property, like in the Platonic sense of tableness. Instead, tables instantiate the property of tableness, but only in reality. There's no Platonic realm where tableness exists
That's
or anything like that.
mereology, right? Or like
Well, no, the mereological view is going to be something like that particles are tabling. They are particles arranged table-wise. That's the mereological view. He's going to take he's more of a realist about the forms. He just thinks the forms are only existing in reality. They don't exist anywhere else. So like ducks, if there were no ducks, there would be no duckness. And duckness only exists as like as a thing that is intrinsically connected to ducks. And it's not this alternative form that's kind of floating out there in Platonic realms.
Mhm.
it's a medium ground, sort of like Kant held to conceptualism. He thought that the forms were things that existed in our minds as a category, and we applied those categories to things in reality, and it's actually our mind making reality that way. So that's a third way between Platonic realism and some sort of like strict sense of nominalism. Some criticize that these.
The Critique of Pure Reason, and don't even get me started on reading that.
Yeah, I've read it several times, and I will tell you this: I've realized something new that he said every single time I've dealt with the work of any kind. Even if I've just read like a couple pages of it or something, I found something new that I missed at least in one of my readings, or either that or I just managed to forget it. I don't know. It's a very very like his writings are so dense with information. That it's hard to really get all of it. And then if you misinterpret it, which there's a lot of arguments out there that Kant's works are heavily also misinterpreted. And so like when you read other like people who have written about it, you get the wrong sense of what Kant was trying to say according to them. I don't think that that's the case. I think that most people pretty much. I think that the general idea of Kant is pretty well understood actually. I don't think it's as vague as people. As some of the people try to make it out to be. They're like, oh no, he could have been saying this. Like, no, I don't think he was though.
I mean, there's some like I generally at this point through experience, and I own like 4 like continental books, which I would never do again, like from the actual translation. I'm no matter who it is, besides I would say like Plato, because like his dialogues and his stuff are like I find like really easy to understand. His dialogues were probably like some of the best non-contemporary literature.
Yeah, I find Plato pretty easy to digest actually. One of the main benefits of him in a one course is that it is so easy to digest. It's like, okay, I can make sense of what the hell he's trying to say. Put Hegel in my hands, which they did in the entry course. I had to read Phenomenology of Spirit. Never again. I fucking hated that work.
I mean, I'm even though I didn't take a course on it, I'm kind of on with you in that boat that I spent what was it, like $18 on a Hegel book. So like I'm too lazy to return it, and I mean maybe sometime I'm gonna like find use in it, but at this point I never can like possibly think of an instance where I'm gonna be like, let me pick up Hegel and read it, like his actual work. That's just. But also,
it's easier.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say it's easier for me like to listen to the consensus among Hegel scholars, right? To like listen to a Hegel scholar give a lecture and then try to see if I can find conformity between like the interpretation from other scholars. But it's very very difficult reading. I agree.
Agreed. I would also suggest that for Hegel. There's like I was saying, there's some philosophers you can actually deal with their first-hand work, and they're short enough, dense enough, and make a very like simplistic or a point that's worth reading about to get the general idea of the argument. I find that to be more a modern phenomena. Like if you read philosophy papers, which I read a lot of papers, that's where you're going to get like a very stringent idea of the topic that they're talking about. You're going to get a very well laid out argument, and then you're going to get a conclusion, and then you're going to get pure responses, right? That just wasn't the case for some of these older works. Like it's very hard to dig through Hegel because he says a lot without saying a lot. If that makes sense. His books are long, and by the time I get to the point that's being made, I've already forgotten what the beginning of the point was. At least that's my experience of it.
Yeah, him and Kant are definitely like way too verbose. Like the Critique of Pure Reason is so thick. The book I own, it's not worth all those pages. Like I'm pretty sure he could have like done the same writing in like probably less than a third of what he actually wrote.
I see a bunch of new people coming in. If you're a theist and you think that you have like a rational version of God or something that you believe in, feel free to come up and share your view. That's what the topic is. Is theism rational? We just kind of got off on a tangent talking about.
What's up, Tart? What's up, Tart?
Who's saying what's up? Oh, it's Barthology. What's up, Barth? How you doing, man?
Buddy?
Just testing out the. I don't usually get on the stages in Clubhouse, and I barely listen in either. But here I am, so I'm on stage and talking.
Yeah, it was. I heard your voice. I was like, I know who that is.
It's so funny. I run into people in Clubhouse that I haven't run into in years on Discord. Are you still even on Discord?
Am I?
Yeah,
I am, but since I'm not, since I have like a life and a family, I can't be on as much. So I'm just becoming less and less popular.
In your relationship with
So, if you're on this app 24 hours a day, and you're always in the chat room, then you become more popular. But during COVID, everyone was on, and when COVID was on, and I was on every day, I was winning. But now that everyone has to go back to work, and we all have lives to live, I'm losing.
that's unfortunate. I also see Brody. How you been, man? I don't know if you're there or not.
No, I'm here. I haven't talked with you in a while, and by a while I mean ages. And by ages I mean like
easily a year. Easily a year at this point.
Easily more than a year.
Is it really? Has it been that long?
Feels like more.
I think 2 years.
Yeah. Oh, it hasn't been a year.
No. I think more than a year because I'm here for 2 years on Clubhouse. Probably more than 2 years. And all this time I haven't heard your voice even once.
Yeah, I've listened in on some of your conversations. Like I'll pop in and like listen sometimes, but I don't really get on the stages and stuff. So this is the second time I think ever on Clubhouse that I've actually been on a stage.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, I got multiple your room in PNR. Is that how you guys met? Because he asked me I said, yo, why don't you come over to PNR?
They took it down.
And I guess he never used the room.
I guess
because he never used the room. I don't know.
I only got to use it like 3 times, and then it just like was randomly taken down. I didn't bother asking. I mean, I wasn't that active in it. I was hoping to like become more active. I guess maybe that's why they took it down. But it seemed like all the personal rooms that other people had were also taken down. I think they just ended up like taking down all like those rooms or something.
That's the thing, man. If you're not on, like I said to you before, man, if you're not online, then you're not in the room all the time, like Angels Friedman, you're not going to be popular.
By the way, in regards to the title of the room, I'm an atheist, but I do think that theism is rational.
Oh yeah, I'm a theist, and I think theism is rational.
Theism is completely rational, and I have an argument.
Wait, Biscuit, it would be much funnier if you would say, I'm a theist and I think theism is irrational.
Yeah, that's what I should have said.
Yeah.
Missed joke moment. That would have been awesome.
Yeah, so I mean,